More than 150 years ago, the first African American sworn in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, before there was an Emancipation Proclamation. That is our topic tonight on the Timbuktu Report. I hope that you will be with us as we discuss what are possibilities of what Hiram Rhodes Revel went through, a senator from Mississippi, that they did not want a seat. What are the possibilities of that happening again? Things being turned back in the United States of America.
There's healing at the well, at the well, at the well. Wellness Radio, Wellness Radio. There's healing at the well, at the Wellness Radio TV. There's healing at the well. Live a whole, powerful, strong, loving and harmonious life at the Wellness Radio TV.
Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of At the Wellness Radio TV. My name is Pamela D. Marshall, and my co host is Dr. Rick Stevenson, who is a professor of African American Studies at the University of Florida and a man of the cloth. Dr. Stevenson, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to share this airtime with you.
Pleasure having you with us. And as we always do before we get started, we'd like to ask you to take us to the Lord in prayer.
You know, we really need to pray tonight, especially about our subject matter. So let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for another opportunity to share space with Pamela and those who listen to us. We pray that all that we do and say will bring you glory. Open our minds. Help us to remember that if we don't know where we came from, we're going to have a hard time making decisions about where we're going. So thank you for this platform. And we ask you to glorify yourself in all that we do in Jesus' name. Amen.
Dr. Stevenson, it is safe to say that most people never heard of Hiram Rhodes Revels.
Right.
He was sworn into office after the Democrats tried not to seat him because he was a Republican.
Right.
But he was elected and they did not want to seat him. A man who was born of free parents in the Carolinas, and he goes to the U.S. Congress. How amazing was that during that time in our history?
Well, you think about it now, the war is over in 1865. He is actually sworn in February 25th, 1870. So 5 years after the Civil War is over, he becomes one of the first Black representatives to the Senate. But there was also another person. His name was Blanche Kelso. And Blanche Kelso also, he was one of the first ones that served a full term in the Senate. So this kind of thing was going on. Between 1870 and 1871, the United States elected 7 African Americans to the Republican House of Representatives. And so this kind of thing, this uptick, if you will, of African Americans and people of African descent being in the highest level of government really turned the South upside down. That's one of the reasons why they began introducing these various types of codes, Black codes. They tried to prevent people from voting. Sound familiar? Because the numbers were so large. There were so many Black people in the South at the time, they had the ability to literally control the electorate.
Well, and what our history books tell us is about the great migration of the African American from the South to the North for a better life, when in reality they were running for their lives because there was such an effort to run Black people out of the South because Black people outnumbered white people in the South.
Exactly. You know, you've got Rebels in 1870 as a senator. You've got Benjamin Turner, 1871 from Alabama. You've got Robert Lodge from South Carolina, 1871. Joshua Walls, Representative, 1871. I mean, they were taking over the place. That's a matter of fact. As a matter of fact, that is one of the reasons why the Compromise of 1877 is so pivotal, if you will, to the voting experience of Black people in the South. You have this Rutherford Hayes is running for the presidency, and he loses to a guy named Tillman. But because the war is over, the Union soldiers are in the South. They're protecting the now rights to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that Black people have. And so once Rutherford Hayes loses as a Republican, they compromise with the Democrats. The Democrats say, we'll give you the presidency if you remove the soldiers, the Union soldiers from the South who are protecting the rights of these now free Black people.
So we keep being used as tools, is what I'm hearing you say. We credit Abraham Lincoln for the Emancipation Proclamation, but in reality, it was after conversations with people like Frederick Douglass, who said, free the Negroes so they can help fight the war.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find in documents where Lincoln will say, this was not about his love for freeing the slaves. It was an economic decision.
Absolutely.
And used as a pawn against the South.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the Emancipation Proclamation was not designed to free all of the Black people in the South. It was only designed to free those 300,000 who were still in captivity in the Confederacy, right? And when we began to really look at the Civil War, one of the things we discovered is there were Black people who were forced to fight for the Confederacy, right? So the Emancipation Proclamation was not designed to free all of the states. What gave us total freedom was the 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments. The 15th Amendment gives us the right to vote. So, and even the right to vote was only for Black men. Black women didn't get the right to vote then, too. But it just goes to show you how in sheer numbers, right, we were able to come together and collaborate and create such a stink in the government that they wanted to run us out of town. I mean, you've got 7 African Americans in the House of Representatives between 1870 and 1871, 6 years after the war. That's amazing.
6 years after the war, that's amazing that it's not in the history books.
Well, it's in the history.
And if we want to talk about history.
Yeah. Well, it's in some of the history books. Actually, I co-edited.
We're not talking about the ones you wrote. I'm talking about the ones that was put in front of me and that's put in front of most children. They don't see these names, and we've not heard these names.
Sure, you're absolutely right. You're right. You're right.
Okay.
And now they're going to be deprived of even more.
Well, so before you get to that, Hiram, what happened that caused him almost not to be seated? He was elected, and then they didn't. What happened with that?
So first of all, let's do a little bit of background. He was actually born in North Carolina, and he was a minister, right? And he became the first African American senator representing Mississippi because the Black people voted. Now, remember, in North Carolina, there is this major uptick of white supremacist movements that really hits the high point in 1896 when they have the overthrow of the government. But you have this boiling, if you will, and I use that anthropomorphically. You have this boiling in the South, especially in places like Mississippi, Alabama, where the white politicians are afraid that if these Black people were able to vote, if they have the sense enough to galvanize the electorate, they can take over the country. And they are extremely fearful of that. So they began to hatch all these different types of plans to prevent rebels from actually becoming and getting a seat in the House of Representatives. And then right behind him comes um, what's his name? Blanche Kelso, who also was from Mississippi. He was uh, he was the first one to actually serve a full term. But the fear is if these black people become leaders in the government, they might do to us what we've done to them.
So you have this period of time shortly after the Emancipation Proclamation, as you pointed out, where all of these men, these black men, are being elected to the highest level of government other than the president. And what is fascinating to me about all of these names and so many other names that we've never heard,
Mm-hmm.
that there is a systematic way of completely keeping them out of the history books. Why?
Mm-hmm. Why do they keep them out of history books?
Yes, sir.
Because you can't tell people that they're inferior and then say you're smart enough to run the country. It's contradictory. So we just continue the inferiority paradigm and then make sure we can control the textbooks. Remember, I think about 6 months ago, you and I did a conversation on the United Daughters of the Confederacy,
Hmm.
and we talked about how they controlled the textbooks.
Hmm.
And they had this one particular document that was an instrument that they used to determine what would be published and what would not. So, because these United Daughters of the Confederacy ran this campaign to control the textbooks, that's how they dictated what would be in those books. And those books were actually used all the way up into the 1970s.
So, as you said, it's contradictory to all of the other stories that need to be fed and the propaganda about the the newly freed Negro, that they actually are smart enough to run the country, that they really are humans. So then they're elected, and then we have this Reconstruction period. You were talking about the black people, the black men who were left in the South to help protect the and implement the laws that had been put in place. And then
Mhm.
what happens?
So, so Reconstruction is just that. The South is trying to reconstruct itself financially,
Make America great again.
make America great because it wasn't great before. It's not. so, but again, now you have all these African Americans who some of them are literate, some of them are not. But then you have those like Kelso, which is really important because Kelso could actually hobnob with the white politicians because he was very light complexioned. So it's kind of like the spook who sat by the door idea, right? In that he was able to get into these rooms, and Bruce was selected to serve the full term primarily because of the Republican black colleagues. It took 52 of 84 votes in the second ballot over the Republicans, the Democrats, in order for him to get in the office. So because there was so much, I don't know what the word is. There's a word. I can't think of the word, but there was so much pandering. There was so much pandering amongst the Democrats to keep these black people out that as Reconstruction begins to lay itself bare and black people are being uplifted and protected by the Union soldiers, the Democrats or the Dixiecrats have to figure out what are we going to do. Well, that's what happens in 1877. The Compromise of 1877 really makes a significant shift in how politics in America takes place because a backdoor deal was made between the Republicans who lost and the Democrats who won, that if we give you the presidency and you remove these soldiers from protecting the rights of these African Americans, we introduce what we now call Jim Crow. And that's how the black codes and all those things began to develop in the South.
So we will legally give you the right to do whatever you want to do with the Negroes.
Exactly.
So from the time that Reconstruction, how many years do we have before another person of color is elected
It depends on where you're located.
to
Uh,
the U.S. Congress?
oh, good. Well, let me see. That's a good question. I'm not.
Many years, safe to say, many, many years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because in 1896, you still have a significant number of black people in the House
Hmm.
and in the Congress. But then in North Carolina, for instance, in Wilmington, North Carolina, because there is this fusion now of poor whites and poor blacks. Oh, that's another thing that happens. They create this party called the Fusion Party. The Fusion Party were poor whites, black people, and anyone else who was not a part of the elite group, and they become a very interesting and voting party of individuals. And in Wilmington, North Carolina, not only does the KKK and the red shirts overthrow the government, they create a document called the White Man's Declaration of Independence.
Hmm.
And in the White Man's Declaration of Independence, it comes out in November 9th, 1898. They say, once we get these black people out of town, we will never allow another black person to govern us again. And they don't have another person of color into the North Carolina Congress or the House until I think 1996.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, and you can read the article. Most of that information was written in a newspaper article that came out. It was called the Observer, and another one was called the Richmond Planet, and both of those were the newspapers that talked about these events.
Dr. Rick Stevenson, professor of African American history and studies at the University of Florida, we're talking about the first African American to be elected to the U.S. Senate in 1870, shortly after the Civil War. And as we look at where we are today and voter suppression
Mhm.
laws that are being implemented, things that are making it very difficult, polling places that are closed in African American communities to suppress the vote. Talk about those efforts that were made then and the efforts that are made now, and why this feels like deja vu to those who know African American history.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the biggest fears of American politicians is if they lose the reins of power. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Wade Nobles, but he says the essence of power is the ability to define someone else's reality and make them live according to that definition as though it were their definition of their choosing. In other words, there's a sense in which America wants us to believe, based on their power structure, that what they're doing is the right thing. But Lord Acton said power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we are in a space right now, today, just similar to what we were in the 1860s, where the people who are in power are legitimately and deliberately trying to suggest that they're making good decisions for us, and that in order for the country to really move forward, we have to prevent the immigrant. We have to prevent the Hispanics. We got to prevent black people from coming forward because we know what's best. And this white male heteronormative perspective of power and control is detrimental because we are a nation of multi-ethnic and multicultural perspectives. And it is that perspective that makes us what we really are. The fear is if these people congregate, if they fuse together, they're going to overrun us. And I don't think that's the case at all.
When we think about how much we felt like America was moving forward with the election of the United States of America's first African American president in President Barack Obama. Did that election and him being in the White House for 8 years, how much did that set race relations and put fear in the hearts of a group of people who had fear?
Yeah, I think it ignited a lot of fear, anxiety, concern. But what people fail to realize about the presidency is the president doesn't run the country. You got the House and you got the Congress, and the Republicans had the House, and so a lot of things that former President Obama, wanted to get through, he couldn't get through because of Mitch McConnell. I mean,
Well, but just the image, just
oh,
seeing we're not being taught civics in school anymore, so people don't even understand that. They just, they see the president. They actually think, the king and queen of England are running something too.
well, again, I think
So the image, while yes, we can, and then what we're seeing now is not on my watch. You're not going to. When you look at what happened in the House with the election of its current speaker and all of the compromises that had to be made, it
okay.
reminds me of the compromises that you just talked about. We're gonna give you back control of the Negroes.
Hmm.
This is our swap.
Yeah, exactly,
How?
exactly. Now I wish I could explain that. All I can say is that as a black collective, we need to get our heads together and pay close attention to what's going on. Because when you have a person like McCarthy in as a speaker, you've got people in the Congress like George Santos, who has no ethics whatsoever and has been placed on committees that make significant major decisions in this country. We ought to be paying close attention to what's happening here,
Yeah.
right? This is you watch how former President Donald Trump stacked the Supreme Court with justices that lean the same direction as the Republican Party's going. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be wary of, because they do remind us of the Compromise of 1877 and all those kinds of events that had gone on after the Civil War. And I think the biggest fear is that the white population is going to be replaced. That's not the issue for most people of color.
No.
Um, you listen to James Baldwin. James Baldwin said, "I want the same things that you want. I want peace. I want to raise my kids in a safe place. I don't necessarily want your job. I want to be able to walk down the street and not be killed." I was watching a court case today when Botham John was killed in his apartment in Tennessee, and how this police officer thought she was in her own house and shot this man to death. I mean, come on, how is that possible, right? How do I know my house when I'm in my house. There's no way I could walk into, even when I lived in apartment buildings, these are years ago. If I was I would know whether I was on the second or third floor, right?
And you know
So
what your house smells like, and you know what it smells like in somebody else's house. Good
exactly,
or bad, not saying that somebody else's house stinks, but you know the aroma in your space.
exactly. So those kind of shenanigans are allowed to occur because it's another way of building their support to maintain a certain, racial ethos. And I just no, I think that as a black people, we have to really get our heads together and pay close attention to what's happening, not only in front of us, but behind closed doors. Otherwise,
Dr. Rick,
we're going back with the 1877 event.
well, Dr. Rick Stevenson, you and I both have talked about Carter G. Woodson's book many times about depending on the oppressor to educate your children. Do you think that what's happening now should be a cry for people to take more responsibility for what their children are learning by teaching at home, by spending some time making sure that you have books that teach your history in your home,
Absolutely.
because school is not the only place that children can learn.
Well, there was a time when that was the thing to occur. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have computers. When you sat around the table at dinner with mom and dad or whatever your family makeup was, that's where you talked. That's where you learned. When we went to church, we learned to give speeches in church because we gave the Christmas speech and the Easter speech. We learned how to dress because there were certain things you had your Sunday go to meeting clothes. I mean, those are the kinds of things that made us who we are, the baby boomers, right?
And pride. Don't go out of here embarrassing your family.
Exactly. There was certain. I mean, I was coming home from school the other day, and so this guy walked across the street, and I mean, his pants were so low. I mean, he literally had to hold them up while he's walking. I mean, how does that? How does that suggest I want to be a part of your community, right?
Or anybody's community. I don't know how you want to be a part of my community looking like that.
Exactly. And so those are the kinds of things that are allowed and permitted and encouraged that you and I, if we try something like that, I have students who wear jeans with holes in them.
Well, Daddy wouldn't even let my brothers grow an afro. You wouldn't even go grow an afro, and we would braid our hair, get to school, and make it out. But you better plait it back up by the time that bus got to that driveway at our house.
Exactly. There were just certain things. I
Standards.
I think it falls under the category of the politics of. Gosh, I just lost the thought.
Dr. Stevenson, let me just add that as we are looking at history and reflecting on history and what happened, um, that shows the capability of what we can do.
Hmm.
How do we go back and gather strength among ourselves to say, hey, wait a minute, that right there in the head bunny and the fluffy shoes, that's house shoes in the grocery store. That's not who we are.
Right.
How do we do that? And let me just encourage those of you who are watching,
Yeah.
share this not because I'm on it,
Yeah.
but because of what Dr. Stevenson is saying. Share this, and this becomes a topic of conversation as
Yeah.
opposed to things that don't lift us up at all. How
No.
do we look and learn more about the Hiram rebels, the black men who fought in both sides of this war, and come to our conclusion about who we are as opposed to the propaganda of deadbeat dads, shiftless, lazy criminals.
Yeah. I wish I could answer that question. I wish that I could wave a magic wand and then our young people would be so interested in what we're doing today, what you and I are doing right now, that they would not want to continue with this kind of behavior. But I think that they are so many of them are so enamored by technology and enamored by the cell phone that the real fundamental basic things of human interaction and human intercourse and social respect. I mean, even saying please and thank you nowadays no longer exists. Those are kind of things that build community, right? And I think what you're driving at is how do we get back to being community?
Right, a cohesive.
Yeah,
So 1870, first African American elected to Congress. We're in 2023, more African Americans and women and other nationalities in Washington, D.C. today than ever in history, yet we're still at risk of the Voting Rights Act being turned back and other things being overturned, Roe v. Wade,
yeah,
that people are still trying to figure out how do we operate under the latest ruling on that. What do you say to people who are watching about what the significance of what we're at risk of, even though we have all of these different groups in Washington, D.C. today, but still there's a power that is working hard to overturn some things that are
yeah.
currently in place?
I say pay close attention to the people that you vote for. That those individuals who are in the Congress, those who are in the House, either we put them there because we voted for them, or we put them there because we didn't vote at all.
Because we didn't vote at all. Victoria Stevenson says, this should be good. Victoria, I hope it was good. Thank you both for continuing to share your insight and education. We thank you very much, Victoria, for watching. Chris Marshall out there watching too. Thank you very much for watching, Christopher. This is an opportunity for us to take a look at some things that we don't hear about or that was not put in our history books, topics that you won't hear about on the news, but are critical in a way that they are helping to shape the news of today on the Timbuktu Report. Dr. Rick Stevenson, I appreciate your insight every week, and thank you so much for carving out time to be with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for watching. We will see you next week on the Timbuktu Report, where our goal is to inspire, to educate, and help you to raise the bar, not just on how you're looking, but what you're thinking, how you're acting, and how you're interacting with others. I really appreciate you being here. We will see you next week on the Timbuktu Report. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing
At the well.
Make it a fantastic moment. We'll see you next time.